There is so much NFL on ESPN right now. Monday Night Football, plus pregame and postgame. NFL Live, NFL Primetime. Everything you need to stay on top of every game, every week.
Unbelievable.
And now NFL Network is on the ESPN app. More football, more coverage, more ways to watch. Football's on all season long on ESPN and streaming on the ESPN app.
I've always had quite varied interests, and I would say that there's two things that interest me in particular. One is military history and aviation, jointly, if you like, sort of military aviation type stuff, and also mysteries. And I first came across this particular story when I've been researching Russian or Soviet military history for many years, and that's how I first came across the Dyatlov story, and it was really intriguing. Two reasons. One is there's no set answer to it. You know, it really is a mystery, like the Marie Celeste, because nobody really knows what's happened. And the other one, the other aspect of it that really intrigued me is it was in the Soviet Union. So there was the added, if you like, secrecy and mystery. It's always been a very tight on security type of place. So, you know, the society in the old Soviet days was everything was strict security, strict need to know type basis. And I think they sort of added to this the mystery about the Dyatlov story, because it's only really come into prominence since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's really starting to get a bit of traction now in the West, the whole thing. There's, as you probably know, there's been a film about it by Rennie Harlin. You know, whether or not, you know, it's your cup of tea, I have to be honest, it wasn't my cup of tea, but nonetheless, you know, there's a film being done about it, and I suspect there'll be other films made about it. But you know, people are really starting to get into it. But it's you know, there's a lot of twists and turns to it, and that's why I like it, because a lot of mysteries seem to have one most probable answer to it, even if you can't prove it.
Sure,
with this story, it's Yuri Kuntsevich, who I regularly correspond with, who runs the Dyatlov Foundation in Ekaterinburg. His view is it's like a gigantic knot. He says you undo one knot and then you find another one. You know, it's like a massive rope that's all been tied up, and nobody knows how to get to the bottom of it. The thing about it is, you wonder if it's been set out like this, because no matter what path you go down, it doesn't answer all of the questions. You know, if you come out, we'll go through the theories in a minute, but you know, if you go down the avalanche theory, well, there's things that are unexplained about that. You think, well, it could be an avalanche, but you know, this says it wasn't an avalanche. You go, you know, and other people have a Yeti theory, and you know, there's the military accident theory, which I tend to favor, I have to be honest. But I keep an open mind on it. You know, I think what some people tend to do about this particular story is they'll say, as far as I'm concerned, it's an avalanche, and that's the end to it. And what you do with that is you're closing your mind off to other possibilities. You know, everything then has to fit your view of what it is. I came in for I mean, I've said this in other interviews, I came in for a bit of flack from some people because I included a theory in my book called the Yuri Yakimov theory. That's the name of the guy who put forward his view. And it's, I'd say, a kind of a UFO type theory, if you like.
Yeah.
He was, you know, I mean, I don't know if you want to discuss it now, but he was working up in a mine not that far from the Dyatlov Pass, actually. And he had a strange experience one night with some lights that he was working in a pit, and these lights appeared. And his impulse, his immediate impulse was to get away from them. He was frightened of them, and he hid for a while. And he found that when he looked at the lights, the lights started coming towards him. It sounds, I don't know if you want any foul language on here. I'll say a load of nonsense. But he met another guy, a forest ranger, who this was a couple of years later. A forest ranger, a very dour, older Russian guy who'd been living in the forests all his life. He had exactly the same experience. And this guy had a gun with him, a rifle, which he used to protect himself from bears, and wolves, any other wild animals that might be dangerous. But he had exactly the same experience with these lights. He'd made a fire one night, and these lights sort of shone on him from a distance away. When he stared at them, they started coming towards him. And his overwhelming feeling was one of fear. And he hid himself and then left it for a while until he heard a noise and then looked and the lights had gone. Now, you have two people here who have exactly the same story. You could say they're in collusion, maybe, who knows? But I included it in the book because it was quite an interesting take. Well, it was when I first contacted Yuri Kontsevich, I asked him for more information, and it was only after talking to him that he started, I started looking at the pictures and talking to him about the possibilities. You see, he also keeps a very open mind on the whole thing. I mean, when I was over visiting him, he's contacted, obviously, by a lot of people pretty regularly, and I get people contacting me virtually every week putting forward theories. And some of the theories are quite interesting. There's been quite a few in the last year or so. There's people contacting me with some very interesting theories. There's a lot of other theories that I would tend to discount. One of the ones, just for example, that was put forward was they were all climbing a tree and the tree snapped and they all fell on top of each other and broke all their bones, and some of them crawled away. And you think, well, maybe, but it doesn't explain how they got there wearing next to nothing and, decided to climb a tree. But, like I say, I try and be open-minded about it. But as I say, I started getting into it when I started talking to Yuri about it and started looking at the pictures. I mean, the pictures are the thing that really got me going about it, because it brought the whole thing to life. This wasn't a story. We hear about the Marie Celeste and you think, okay, well, we've seen a sailing boat. We know who was on board, but it's in your imagination. A story like that, or you read it in a book, but the pictures for this really bring it to life for me. They took photographs when they were on their way there, and that within a couple of days they're all going to be dead. There's something about it that really hits you in the gut, those photographs, and you sort of look at them and you try and think, you almost want to try and ask them through the photographs what happened. Yeah, that's how it affects me. When I'm looking at the photographs, they haunt me. Okay, well, what they were doing, a lot of people are saying, what the hell were they doing up there in the first place? But there was a group of 10 of them had got together to. It was called ski tourism, which was very popular among students in the Soviet Union because, and it was encouraged by the authorities because military applications to it. You need to be very fit, you need to be good at map reading, and finding your way around in forests and sort of, you're not anywhere near civilization. They're all skills that you can turn to use in the military area. So. And it also requires a very high degree of physical fitness. But they enjoyed it. It was very popular among students. And what they were doing, it was a test of what they'd set out a route to Mount Otorten, which in the local Mansi language means "don't go there." But I'll come to that in a minute. What the titles of the mountains. It's about 500 to 600 miles north. The city was called Sverdlovsk in those days. It's Ekaterinburg now. But they'd set out north on their journey on the 23rd of January in 1959. And by all accounts, everything went pretty smoothly. They took a train north, then they took a bus after they got off the train, and then they took a lorry, and then they went on foot for the last 70-odd miles. and one of the students, Yuri, fell ill. He was actually ill on the way. He was not feeling very well at all. They reached an abandoned woodcutters settlement on the 28th of January. This is almost a week after they left. And he decided to turn around and come back. So we know everything that happened, if you like, up to that point, because he was with them. We have the photographs as well, but he was there. So he related the story of how it all went up to that point, and there was nothing untoward. After he left them, even with the photographs and the group diary that was kept, nobody really knows what happened to them, except until the day their bodies were found. Well, they continued towards their goal, and this is where it starts getting a bit peculiar, because where they ended up, which is, again, this is the Mansi language, Holat Siakal, which is probably as near the pronunciation as I can get, which means dead mountain, strictly speaking, but it's also called Mountain of the Dead because of the dead that are being found there. Mm-hmm. The Mansi, which was the local tribe, gave names to various places, all names with meanings. Otorton, which is where they were going, don't go there, means don't go there in winter because, they're tribesmen who herd reindeer, and it's a difficult place in winter to get to and all the rest of it. So each name has a kind of a practical meaning. Dead mountain means it's not much good for growing stuff on, it's pretty barren. That's what it means. But like I say, it's got other connotations to it now. But just coming back to the actual journey of the group, they weren't going there at all. That wasn't on their planned route. Yuri himself had said that he didn't really know why they were there. It was they were 9 miles south of where they were going, and they pitched their tent about between 4 and 5 o'clock on the 1st of February. There was quite a strong wind blowing. It was minus 27 degrees centigrade. It was really cold. The snow was about 4 to 5 feet deep. So pretty inhospitable conditions. They didn't keep a diary for the last day, the 1st of February, so we don't really know why they were up there. And the odd thing about it is that they were all skilled map readers. Igor Dyatlov, whose name has been given to the place, he was the group leader. He'd actually been up there the year before, so you'd expect him to have, known his way. Oh, sure. So anyway, they pitched their tent that night, and coming into the night, they would have pitched the tent by about 5 o'clock in the evening. The sun went down at 2 minutes past 5 that day. About 2 to 3 hours after that, something happened, and we don't know what, that caused them to slash their way out of the tent, run down the mountain to the tree line, which was about 1/8 of a mile away from where the tent is. And that's where the bodies were found. Virtually 3 weeks, just over 3, nearly 4 weeks later. Well, you see, again, it gets odd there because I did a program of it on this for the Discovery Channel, and there was a mountaineering expert who was there to give survival advice. And he was saying to me that they were down by the tree line, but he said if it had been him, and he'd run away from the tent, he doesn't understand why they didn't go into the trees for further protection from the wind. They were found on the outside, just on the outside, the perimeter of the tree line. He said it seems odd that they stayed there. They didn't go in. You'd get more shelter, he said, going into the actual forest there. So, you come into the theory then, was there something in the forest they were trying to avoid? Was there something frightening them? But then why had they run away from the tent? So, one of the first things you come to after they've run away from the tent is, why didn't they go and get more shelter in the trees?
There is so much NFL on ESPN right now. Monday Night Football, plus pregame and postgame. NFL Live, NFL Primetime. Everything you need to stay on top of every game, every week.
Unbelievable.
And now NFL Network is on the ESPN app. More football, more coverage, more ways to watch. Football's on. all season long on ESPN and streaming on the ESPN app.
Yeah. So anyway, just to go on, they were meant to have returned around the 14th or 15th of February, and Igor Dyatlov was meant to have sent a telegram on the 12th of February to say that they were on their way back from the first civilization they came to, which is a village called Vizhai, and that's been burned down now years ago in a forest fire. So he was meant to send the telegram back to say, "Oh well, we're on our way back." Anyway, that telegram never arrived, and they were due back, as I say, around the 14th, maybe the 15th. They allowed a few days because obviously you can't keep the strict deadlines doing something like they were doing. But time went on, people started getting, the parents were getting agitated. Their friends were starting to wonder what happened, and there was a lot of inertia by the authorities to get, not necessarily a search party going, but when people were saying, well, there's no sign of them, what do you think's happening? The authorities didn't seem as if they wanted to do anything. It was only when parents started complaining to high party officials in the Communist Party that something actually started getting moving. And there's theories about that. You're coming back to, was there a cover-up? Was it something to do with the authorities and the military and all the rest of it? But anyway, they eventually got their act together, and search parties started going north to start looking for them. And the search party started heading up on the 23rd. So that's, over another week has been lost from when they were due to have arrived back. There were several search parties sent up, and the tent was found on the 26th of February after 3 days searching, and the following day they found the first two bodies by a cedar tree, and they were almost naked by a fire, and there's all sorts of theory. There's a theory that they suffered from hypothermia, and what happens when you're dying from the cold is you get what's called paradoxical undressing, where you start undressing yourself because the blood comes back out to the extremities, and you're not far from death when that happens. But these guys, the first two that they found, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, they only had their underwear on. They've been stripped of their clothes, and their hands and their feet were burnt. They've been putting their hands and their feet into the fire to try and warm them up. Well, I'm just going to come to that. When they started finding the other bodies, so the next two bodies that were found were Igor Dyatlov and what was his girlfriend, Zina. They were found as if they'd been trying to make their way back to the tent. They both frozen to death. A few days after that, they found the body of Rustam Slobodin. He was in the middle of the two of them, which shows you how deep the snow was, that they hadn't found him for a few days after they found the other two, and they were all three in a straight line. And then it was 2 months after that before they found the remaining four bodies, and they were 70 meters away it looked as if they tried to create a kind of a den, if you like, to protect them, but they had suffered the worst injuries. The two of them in particular were very badly injured, Luda and a guy called Zolotarov, Semyon Zolotarev. They had crushed ribs. Her nose had been flattened into her head as if she'd been punched really hard. All the cartilage was broken and smashed. They're quite horrific, and all her ribs were cracked in a straight line. What the autopsy said, it looked as if they'd been in a car crash, but without any external markings on their bodies, which adds further mystery to it. Well, it's about, the thing is, you're up in the mountains where they were. If you like, what they were doing, the Urals runs in a north-south line, and what they'd done was they'd followed it parallel, if you like, and then turned in. But the nearest village was about 80 miles away. You get the odd sort of settlement of Mansi, but they're nomadic and they tended to keep to themselves. But the nearest help was, well, when I say help, the nearest village was 75, 80 miles away, and that was just a tiny village. The nearest town was probably another 20, 30 miles after that. And the nearest big city where they'd come from was 500 miles away. And that's where really all the help was coming from. They had to bring up everybody to, assist in the search. So, you're talking, well, literally hundreds of miles away from real help. They're out, and you're out on your own. The thing is, you've got, unless you experience, you've got no idea the conditions up there because, the snow's 4 foot deep. To go out of your tent without adequate clothing or covering, and some of them ran out of the tent after they'd slashed their way out of it. Some of them didn't even have socks on. So you got into 4 foot deep snow and running away from the place where it's going to keep you warm. You're not going to survive very long. I mean, something frightened them. There's 2 lines you can take. Something scared them so much that they slashed their way out. I mean, it must have been immediate. It's not like let's go out the front and see what it is. It was like grabbing knives just to get the hell out of it. And it is a theory that something had affected their brains more or less all at the same time, and drove them mad, if you like. There's been talk of chemical weapons. A couple of theories have been put forward that you can say like magic mushrooms, but fly algaric was one of the theories put forward, which is something that's diluted from, pardon my language here, but reindeer urine, but it gives you hallucinations.
Gotcha.
So you
familiar,
could the something used by the Mansi. So maybe they were students out for a bit of fun, and somebody thought, well, let's try this stuff. It keeps coming back on itself. You see another thing about Luda Dubonina. She was a very forthright girl, very strong character. I've said this before in interviews. Apparently, she was known for speaking her mind. If she thought you were an idiot, she'd say it to your face. And her tongue was missing. The autopsy didn't say that her tongue had been cut out. It just said it was missing. But there was a large quantity of blood found in her stomach, which would imply that when her tongue was removed, she must have been alive to have swallowed the blood. Otherwise, she wouldn't have swallowed it into her stomach. So that's a peculiar aspect of it. A lot of people focus on the tongue. There's been other theories that have said, well, maybe it was microbes or something had eaten the tongue away, but why eat the tongue away and no other soft flesh? But the fact, and Yuri Yudin, the survivor, said it himself, that it seemed odd that her tongue should be missing when she had, if you like, the biggest mouth out of all of them. Well, but again, why would they? The thing is, I think of some of the injuries. People say, oh, they fell into a ravine or so, but there was no ravine to fall into. I've seen that you can see the pictures of the den where they were. The snow drifts, so they were found under 12 foot of snow when they found the remaining bodies. The snow would cushion your fall anyway. A lot of them had injuries to their heads. So if you're falling, all right, your arms might flail a bit, but one of your natural instincts is to try and protect your head with your hands. So it doesn't explain the if you like, the injuries to the fractures to the skull. And because some of them had fractures to their skulls, and to get a line, and almost an exactly straight line down, breaking all the ribs of 2 of them, almost implies that they both fell the same way and fell on the same thing. Statistically, it's almost impossible, but it looks like as if some kind of machine had done it. Yeah, it really is. And so you think, well, how would you do that? How would you break your own ribs without any mark on the outside of your body? Because there was no marks on any of the bodies either. That's the thing that really puzzles everyone. Well, you have to look at that. I mean, I run this through my head, several times a week. You try and look for an angle on it and think, well, what could have done it? And the trouble is, you think, well, is it man-made? I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily follow the UFO theory, but I'm open-minded enough to think that, let's face it, it's a great big universe out there. That if something had come down and caused injuries like that and then gone away, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility. Okay, it has to be proved, but so does every other theory have to be proved. I mean, the thing is, radiation was found in the clothes of some of them. It's peculiar the way they carried out the autopsy, because they compared the organs of them, and they didn't stipulate, whose organs they were. It's like the bodies were dissected, and the organs of members of the group were compared with organs and the bodies of people who'd been in car crashes in Sverdlovsk, who died in well, I say died normally, but died in a relatively normal accident. So it seemed peculiar to do it that way, like to compare the heart of somebody from the group with the heart of somebody who'd been killed in a car crash, but not to say whose heart it was. But the two of the jumpers were found to contain traces of radiation when they examined them. Mm-hmm. But you see, that comes to another peculiar thing. Lev Ivanov, who he was the policeman in charge of the investigation. When he went up there, he had a Geiger counter with him. But, policemen in those days didn't have, you wouldn't take a Geiger counter to investigate what might have been a murder.
Take your love for the game further with EA Sports Madden NFL 27. Powered by the all-new Persona engine, it's your league. Transform how you run your franchise. And with a kickoff bundle, you can start from the beginning with access to College Football 27 and Madden NFL 27 Standard Editions. From campus legend to NFL superstar, make your rise with a kickoff bundle. Learn more at EA.com. Rated E for everyone with mild lyrics, user interact, and in-game purchases includes random items.
Every mile matters, whether you're driving your dream car or your daily commuter. The Mobil 1 team knows that. It's why we created Mobil 1 Advanced Clean Motor Oil. It cleans your engine in one oil change and helps extend engine life, delivering performance, protection, and cleanliness for vehicles of all ages. All to help keep your engine running like new, whatever you're driving. Visit mobil1.com/advancedclean to learn more.
Late night bites with friends? Already hard to beat. That first too hot bite of fries you couldn't wait for, followed by ice cold Pepsi. Now that hits different. Suddenly, the energy kicks back in, the night goes longer, and the laughs don't stop. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
There is so much NFL on ESPN right now. Monday Night Football, plus pregame and postgame. NFL Live, NFL Primetime. Everything you need to stay on top of every game, every week.
Unbelievable.
And now NFL Network is on the ESPN app. More football, more coverage, more ways to watch. Football's on, all season long on ESPN and streaming on the ESPN app.
It's a peculiar piece of he must have been given the Geiger counter by somebody higher up in authority. You don't go measuring radiation unless you have a reason to do so. I mean, the hair was an unnatural color. Okay. You could say there was also the skin was a kind of a tan color. Yeah, but you can possibly explain some of that away. Yuri Kontsevich, he was 12 years old at the time, but he saw the bodies and he went to the funeral, and he said that the hair was gone grey and the skin had an unnatural color, but you could maybe put that down to being exposed to the elements or whatever, but again it's another aspect of it. But bodies have been found in the Arctic with dark hair from 100 years ago. are perfectly preserved. So there is that aspect. You could say, well, if bodies can be preserved totally in the Arctic, why weren't their bodies preserved? Well, I mean, they weren't carrying any weapons. The thing is, bears are hibernating at that time. Anyway, there was no animal tracks. The only bear that would have created a problem, that they call them shaitan or shaitan, which means wanderer in the local language. They're bears that are not hibernating because they haven't been able to get enough to eat, and they are extremely dangerous, and they'll attack anybody or anything if they can get hold of them for food. But there was no animal tracks there. There was no animal tracks found. The only thing that may have presented a danger to them would have been a large pack of wolves. But wolves are a bit like humans, in a way that why work too hard for your next meal? If you can get it easy, wolves go for some, rabbits and easier prey. If they're going to attack, say, reindeer, that's quite a big animal for even a group of wolves to attack. It means a lot more work. A group of 9 humans, all pretty fit, would present quite a challenge for even a large pack of wolves. But as I say, there was no animal tracks around. Well, yeah, I mean, two of them had worked at Chelyabinsk, which is south of Ekaterinburg, and it was a closed, Sverdlovsk was a closed city at the time as well, just about everywhere in the Urals seems to have been closed. But there was a nuclear research facility going on, and two of them, Krivonyshenko and Kolovatov, were both had worked with nuclear materials. And there's a theory that that there may have been a clandestine mission. Zolotarev was much older than all. They were all around, early 20s. Zolotarev was much older. He was actually old enough to be the father of some of them. He was approaching 40 years old, and he's a bit of a mystery in the whole group, because people say, well, what was he doing there? Because he's that much older than they are. It's not really a mystery that's explained very well. But when you're coming back to a clandestine mission, why would you, go right into the middle of the mountains to hand something over to somebody, some secrets or whatever? It's a pretty difficult place to get to. It's a possibility, but it seems an awful long way to go to hand some material or documents over when you can meet somebody on a street corner and get back in time for your tea. There's a lot of mining going on up there. That's another one of the theories there, which was only suggested recently by a guy called Steve Smith in the USA. He said he came across mining was actually state controlled, but there was obviously illegal mining activity for gold and other precious metals. There's still mining in the Urals, and he put forward the theory that they come across an illegal mining area, people, because it was considered an economic crime to be mining on your own account. It would get you the death penalty if you were caught. So there would have been very good reason for somebody to silence you if you caught them doing that. But then you're talking about a group of 9 people. So, you'd have to overpower them all and kill them all. Zolotarev, just coming back to him, and I've said this before in interviews, he'd won medals for close combat fighting on the Russian front against the Germans in the Second World War. So he wasn't a wuss by any stretch of the imagination. Obviously a guy who could still take care of himself and wouldn't have been frightened easily. But the other thing, just going into folklore, and it's not something I've got much on, but it's supposed to be the lair of the Golden Woman up there, who resides in the northern Urals and is guarding treasure, if you like. And the Golden Woman is in the folklore legends of the place, who can kill people with directed energy. But it's not it's an area that's been looked at by Philip Mantle, who's very much into this sort of thing, and he's bringing out some research on it. occupy. They live in that area. There's not a hell of a lot of them. You're talking about thousands rather than hundreds of thousands, but they're nomadic and they're reindeer herders. They live off the land. And when the bodies were first discovered, suspicion fell upon them initially. They thought that the Mansi had murdered them. For what reason? One of the reasons being that some of the Mansi have sacred sites up there, but it was a bit of a far-fetched theory, I think, because the Mansi were generally quite helpful to. They always have been to anybody passing through. They tend to keep to themselves, but they're not hostile. There was a story that in the 1930s, a Soviet female geologist had been tied up and thrown into a lake and drowned up there because she'd offended one of their sacred sites. But when I made inquiries about it, and Yuri Kontsevich confirmed it to me, he said, well, nobody can find any trace of this female geologist, that's supposed to have been, murdered by them. So it's just a hearsay story. But, like I say, the suspicion fell on them originally that they'd murdered them all. But Lev Ivanov discounted made inquiries when the chief investigator. He made inquiries and he discounted it almost immediately. And they actually were very helpful. They brought their dogs in to help the search and, assisted wherever they could. And the other thing about it as well, I think another reason why the Mansi would have been keen to help, I think in Soviet times, indigenous peoples were quite wary of central authority. They didn't go out of their way to attract attention or, how can we put it, annoy the authority, the central authorities or the police. Mm-hmm. If they'd done something like that, they'd had they knew they would attract a hell of a lot of attention, and they just wanted to be left alone to their, go their own way. So, everything argues against them having committed the crime. And another thing about it, they lead pretty hard lives, the Mansi. In those days, especially, they lived in huts. They were nomadic. And one thing that argues against the group being killed by them or escaped prisoners, which is another theory, they had flashlights, knives, axes, there weren't sleeping bags. There was blankets. There was a lot of things that would have been of use to, either the Mansi or people on the run or whatever. All those things were left behind. Well, you can't,
Can't help
for everything we talk about, you can discount, you can find reasons to discount it. That's the trouble. There was another theory is the special forces, that U.S. special forces or Soviet special forces, that they came across a secret experiment. But I come back to the theory: why would you have a secret experiment in the middle of winter, up in the middle of nowhere? Well, it's possible, but it's not likely. But when I come to the Soviet military accident, for me that's plausible, because these things have happened. People get killed in an accident. The authorities would be, the military would be embarrassed. Everybody else connected with it is embarrassed. You don't want to highlight it, if you like. And that's why I tend to go down that path, because you're coming to, somebody has to be held accountable for it, if you like. You got 9 young people in the prime of their lives. Zena, the one of the 2 girls in the group, was destined for stardom within the Communist Party. A lot of people say, and so you've got all these not necessarily important people, but highly thought of people, killed by a Russian bomber, which is one of the theories. They dropped an air mine, a parachute mine, which had exploded, and the force of the blast had killed them. So they tried to concoct a scene to make it look as if that's, they'd all died in strange circumstances. The trouble is, when you go into a lot of mysteries and you start digging around, unfortunately, you find there's a human hand not too far away at any point. No, they were all in one big tent. What it was it was two tents which were being joined together to,
Gotcha.
it was meant to sleep 10 people. There would have been 10 of them had Uri did not turn back. There was actually 11 of them, but somebody didn't turn up,
Gotcha.
But there was two tents joined together. It'd been made by Igor Dyatlov and the guy who found the actual tent, with the search party, who was a friend of his. They'd made it the one large tent 3 years earlier by sewing it all together. So they were all in one tent, basically.
There is so much NFL on ESPN right now. Monday Night Football, plus pregame and postgame. NFL Live, NFL Primetime. Everything you need to stay on top of every game, every week.
Unbelievable.
And now NFL Network is on the ESPN app. More football, more coverage, more ways to watch. Football's on all season long on ESPN and streaming on the ESPN app.
Late night bites with friends? Already hard to beat. That first too hot bite of fries you couldn't wait for, followed by ice cold Pepsi. Now that hits different. Suddenly, the energy kicks back in, the night goes longer, and the laughs don't stop. Because Pepsi brings out more flavor, more fun, and more of the moment. Food deserves Pepsi. Grab a Pepsi Zero Sugar today.
Yeah, well, one thing I want to go into, just expanding on this military thing. People would say, well, why would the Soviets, why would they want to pretend it was an accident? Well, the thing about, the Soviet Union in those days was, bad news was never welcome, I always say. But, and I give an example of in my book. In 1979, there was a large biological warfare facility. It's still there, actually, although they reckon it's all gone underground now. In the city that they set out from, it was Sverdlovsk then. But in 1979, there was an outbreak of anthrax. They were working on anthrax as a biological weapon.
Mm-hmm.
On the Friday, what had happened was they'd been cleaning the filters on the machines before anything was exposed to the air. The filters were meant to stop the anthrax spores getting out to the open air, and whoever had cleaned the filters had forgot to make a note in the logbook. So the following week, when they started the machines again, there was a release of anthrax out into the atmosphere, which blew to the southeast of the city, away from the city. But as it was, over 100 people were killed by it. I remember when it happened, actually, but the authorities explained it away as being contaminated meat. And with the fall of the Soviet Union, or the breakdown of the Soviet Union, an American team was allowed in there in 1992, and they investigated it, and their investigation showed that it wasn't contaminated meat. There was actually it been ingested in the air, which showed that they'd been working on biological weapons. And the reason for that was because, why they were so agitated about anybody finding out about it was they were breaking the terms of the 1972 convention on it. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because the KGB went around all the hospitals where the dead had been taken to, confiscated all the medical files, and told the doctors what was to go on the death certificates, which was meat contaminated by anthrax. So I put that example in to show that they're not beyond, doctoring evidence or changing the facts to suit, the narrative, if you like. I must admit, if you'd have said something like that to me, I don't know, even 20, say 10 years ago, I'd say, oh, no, nonsense. But I have got an open mind on it because there's so much about this that is unexplained. Even when you try and take the most logical, down-to-earth explanation, you still think, well, it still doesn't fit. There's got to be something else. That's what I have to say. I come back to the paranormal, and it's a thread that I don't discount at all. I really don't. Yeah, you've got to allow for the paranormal. I think in this story, you know, you cannot discount it. I know I'll probably be slated by some people for saying that, but when you look at it, there are so many things which cannot be explained that is, if you like, almost only the other explanation. You know, it could be a military thing, but paranormal to me is up there with the military theory. It has to be, because you just cannot explain it otherwise. You know, and when you start looking at some aspects of it, you know, the paranormal, you know, I'm not going to go into those theories, but you know, you think, well, yeah, there could be, there is something here. Lev Ivanov. One thing I didn't touch on, by the way, and I should bring this in quickly, is the light. There was light orbs which were seen over the northern Urals. The last picture taken on one of the cameras shows what looks like lights coming down, and the lights had been seen over a period of time by a number of people. There was a group to the south of them, about 70 or 80 kilometers south. They'd seen light orbs. And Lev Ivanov had himself said that he had seen a mark on the tree trunk there that looked like a perfect circular burn, as if like a laser beam had been directed onto it. You know, so I'm sorry, I should have mentioned the light orbs sooner, but there's no explanation for these light orbs. People talk about them being rockets, but all the rocket firing or the missile firing was hundreds of kilometers away from that. It wasn't anywhere near the rocket lanes. So you can discount the missile and rocket theory. Yeah, well, I've got two websites. I've got one on the Dyatlov Pass incident, which is what it's called. I'm not very good on my memory with that, www.dyatlov-pass-incident. But if you put my name in, Keith McCloskey, it'll bring up my author's website.
Gotcha.
And you can get copies of my books on Amazon. Well, what I would like also to say is I'm in close touch with Yuri Kontsevich, and there's I'm hoping to go back in 8 weeks' time.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, there's an interesting development, which I'm not going to discuss now because I'm going to try and keep it for I'm hoping to write a follow-up book on this. I hope so, because we're pushing all the time. We're pushing all the time. Both myself, there's other people, you know, there's a lot of people interested in the story. I think if we keep pushing at it, I think, you know, I hope one day we'll get a resolution to it.
Of course.
And as I say, and I say it to your listeners, please keep an open mind, because that's the only way you'll get to the bottom of this.